If you read late 19th century American poetry, you mostly find parlor versifiers writing polite, flowery lyrics. Against that backdrop, Edwin Arlington Robinson appears, writing in strict, rhymed 14-line sonnets. He published his best work between 1897 and 1925. But because literary history tends to categorize writers by form, he is frequently judged against the high modernist works of the 1920s and 1940s. While younger poets like T.S. Eliot were breaking forms and building sprawling, free-verse epics, critics looked at Robinson's absolute adherence to traditional meter and rhyme and incorrectly siloed him as a Victorian relic. The reality is that Robinson was a foundational architect of American literary modernism. He did for poetry what Émile Zola did for the novel. He took the grim circumstances, the alcoholism, the economic ruin, and the raw language of modern life, and dragged them directly into verse. To do this, Robinson engineered what we can call a meta-sonnet. He used extreme narrative compression, highly specific metonymic diction, and deliberate ambiguity to elevate the marginalized working class. Robinson utilized rigid forms as linguistic pressure cookers, designed to force modern psychological trauma to the surface. To see how he achieves this pressure, we must look at his own rules for writing. Robinson argued that structural form must be the natural shape of the thought itself, rather than just a decorative cage. He weaponized the Petrarchan structure in his poem The Sonnet. Notice the rigid division between the 8-line octave and 6-line sestet. He establishes a strict metaphor. The master and the slave go hand in hand. The sonnet is master, the poet is slave. This introduces a concept critics call duplexity. It's the dialogical tension that occurs when a modern poet operates under deliberate self-imposed syntactic subjugation. By forcing his language into these unyielding boundaries, Robinson prevents himself from wandering into inconclusive rambling. The subjugation demands efficiency. It forces the poem's narrative to reach a sharp, highly dramatic, and inevitable resolution. Even when he writes outside the sonnet, he achieves this exact same inevitability, using what critics call the Robinsonian stride, a heavy, march-like momentum, blending rolling and epestic meter with iambic feet. By actively submitting to the master of traditional structure, the poet creates an inescapable boundary. That boundary traps sprawling human tragedies and intensifies them. That intensification allows Robinson to fit the entire arc of a tragedy into exactly 14 lines. He achieves this extreme narrative compression by systematically omitting explicit prose details. Take the sonnet Reuben Bright. It centers on a grieving butcher tearing down his slaughterhouse. Yet, across the 14 lines, the text refuses to explicitly state the root cause of his extreme actions. Instead of using flowery Victorian exposition to explain the character's grief, Robinson relies on profound verbal restraint and plain American speech rhythms. He uses specific metonymic vocabulary to reveal a character's internal state. Notice these mundane words: packed, chest, and chopped up. Packed evokes industrial meatpacking. Chest subtly suggests the vulnerable human heart. Chopped up alludes to the bloody butchery he can no longer perform. Together, these linguistic associations reveal the character's internal reality, a deep, unspoken sense of responsibility for his wife's death. By withholding the explicit facts, Robinson creates a realistic sense of distance. His narratives suggest that even in a brief sketch, the full truth of another person remains ultimately unreachable. Robinson stripped the sonnet of its aristocratic history. By placing the struggles of mill workers and butchers into a form traditionally reserved for romantic nobility, he asserted that these marginalized lives were worthy of the highest level of structural reverence. His 24-line poem, The Mill, focuses squarely on the addicted, the suicidal, and the economically ruined failures of society. He frames these subjects through the lens of an objective observer. The narrator is often a slightly distant townsperson looking in on the wreckage. This deliberate narrative detachment prevents the writing from dissolving into panic or melodrama. The tragedy is allowed to speak entirely for itself. To amplify the sting, Robinson frequently uses temporal contrast. He juxtaposes the grim reality of the subject's present with the vibrant person they used to be, or what the world expected of them. Rather than describing a death directly, he relies on the architectural trope of the house. He uses physical, decaying spaces to reflect a departed soul, defining the person entirely by the emptiness of the room. By focusing on the cold physical remnants left behind and maintaining a reverent, objective distance, the emotional heartbreak of a life's ruin becomes paradoxically sharper. Robinson's technical innovations established the precedent for how modern realism could inhabit traditional structures. His genius lay in recognizing a specific contradiction. The rigid constraints of classical verse were actually the ideal vessels for the chaotic, unspoken ambiguities of the incoming modern era. This methodology laid the direct foundation for the later masterpieces of Robert Frost, shaping works like Design and Directive. Frost inherited Robinson's exact technique, using inherited forms and traditional meters to depict homely American subjects and complex Jamesian psychological nuances. Robinson successfully chronicled the quiet desperation of a society rapidly shifting from the Gilded Age to the Lost Generation. He taught the 20th century that in poetry, what is meticulously omitted from the page holds the absolute most profound weight.